My next guest is Professor Karol Sikora, oncologist, friend of the show. Always good to have him on board. Welcome, Karol.
Hi, Kevin.
Right, well, you and I spoke, I think it was last week or towards the end of the week before that, about the fact that you'd highlighted the NHS cannot be dissuaded from constantly advertising for £80,000 a year diversity officers or diversity chiefs. This is an organisation, that constantly cries poverty and yet spends money like that. This kind of speaks to this kind of incoherence. NHS workers are being told by the National Institute of Health and Care Excellence, that's NICE for short, that you can't now use the term obese to describe fat people. This, of course, obese was sort of brought in because it was decided that fat was offensive, fat shaming, that's offensive. So we've got a new word for it, obese. Well, now they've come to associate the word obese so much with fat that they now find that offensive. So that's been banned. This is to do with good manners, apparently, and person-centred alternatives, whatever that means. This guide by NICE also advises against using the words diabetic, alcoholic, smoker, people with diabetes, and so on and so forth. The point is, why is the NHS wasting its time with this sort of Orwellian claptrap? Karol, explain that to me if you can.
I can't. Kevin, it's madness. It's just absolute madness. Why are we paying people to do this sort of stuff? I have no idea. But let's look at it. Terminology changes with time. There's a beautiful hospital in Queen Square, London, called the National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery. It used to be called the National Hospital for Paralytics and Epileptics. Can you imagine that in a modern world? So certain things change, but certain things shouldn't really change. Obesity is based on your body mass index. If you're very large, you need to do something about it. We know that. The patients often know that. To deny that they're obese, to try and sort of minimize the severity of obesity is just crazy. There's absolutely no point. It's like people are either fat, thin, or in the middle. And we all want to achieve an ideal weight. And I think the problem, it's not about semantics. It's not about the words we use. It's about doing something about it. Even the minister admits the NHS is broken. So that's the first stage in getting it better. For an individual patient, the first thing you have to do is acknowledge that you're beyond the normal weight that you should be, and therefore you should do something about it. So that's my stance. Don't worry about the words.
Exactly right. So there are two concerns here, I think. First of all, there is the complete waste of time of all this. What they're saying is, don't use the word diabetic, use the term people with diabetes. Don't say alcoholic, say people who are dependent on alcohol. Don't say smoker, say people who smoke. In other words, you shouldn't be defined, by one word. Who really cares? Nobody cares. When I was a smoker, I didn't mind people saying, Kevin's a smoker. I still enjoy a drink or two. I don't mind people saying Kevin's a drinker. Tell you what, I'm not the world's most sensible person, but, I'm obviously more sensible than people in the NHS. This is a waste of time and money, but worse than that, this is healthcare. And if someone like yourself, Karol, you can't go to someone and say, look, let's face it, you're a bit fat, or you're rather too obese. What the hell are you going to say to them? Do you see what I mean? It's the Orwellian reduction of language to the point that we don't have the language to explain what conditions people are suffering from. This is dangerous insanity.
It is complete madness. We write to other doctors. If a patient comes referred by a GP, for example, you write a referral back. And it's interesting to see how those letters have changed with the younger doctor. I've been in the business a long time, as you know, 50 years qualified now. And when I started, you'd write very polite letters, but you'd also say what you thought. You said, this cantankerous old
Yeah.
man who drinks far too much and is grossly obese, and you write that sort
Talking
of
about
thing.
me again, are you, Carol? Yeah.
No, no, certainly not. But we now dampen it down, and
Yeah.
we make it a bit nicer, because now the patients get a copy. In the old days, they didn't get a copy. Now, on the whole, most letters go to the patient as well. They can read what you've said about them. So you tend to say, this charming young lady who is slightly overweight, a bit more cautious when the patient gets it. But I think
This charming young
banning
lady for whom we had to widen the door to let her in, that kind of thing.
exactly. I think the important thing is it is just such a waste of people writing this stuff and then sending it widely, which means you don't read most of the stuff you get, the central communication from the NHS. Who wants to read this stuff? Maybe in there is something that's important, but it's lost with all this nonsense like pronouns and obesity and, calling people, if you're an alcoholic, you take too much alcohol by definition. So why not call yourself an alcoholic? Alcoholics Anonymous admit that. You stand up in front of them and say, I'm John, I'm an alcoholic. And you admit it. That's the first way to get better. You have to admit it.
Yeah.
I'm John and I'm obese. Why not?
Exactly.
If you don't admit it, you're not going to get right.
Well, frankly, fat's not a bad word, but we seem to have got. But what I'm saying is, this is the logical extension of this Orwellian madness. If you start banning a word, fat, that's a bit rude, that's a bit sort of OTT. Obese, and then you start the connotations of obese become fat, and then you become terrified of the euphemism. You come up with a euphemism to replace the word fat, and then before too long, as we're witnessing here, you can't use the euphemism. So we go further and further into this crazy rabbit hole. I mean, homeless has been, the word homeless has been banned by NICE. That must be replaced by people experiencing homelessness. Or, if you prefer, disadvantaged people. Well, disadvantaged people does not mean homelessness, does it? So again, this is about imprecise use of language, which in the medical field is not a good idea, is it?
No. Absolutely not. I'm always amazed when you listen to air traffic control, how curt the whole thing is. It conveys the essential details of getting a plane from the sky onto the airport or the other way around. In medicine, we do the same. You use words because you're trying to convey information, usually to another doctor. You're writing a letter or now an email to another colleague, and you just want to make it concise. You don't want a lot of verbosity. You don't want to have people suffering from this. This patient is a person suffering from diabetes or something. You want to say this diabetic.
It's a diabetic, it's a diabetic.
And, just keep it concise. So why not? It's exactly like air traffic. Don't waste words. We're not putting courtesy here. And if the patient doesn't like it, it's tough. I mean, why would they not like it? It's just they want to be treated. They don't want people to pussyfoot around their conditions. I mean, what worries me about this kind of syndrome is it won't be long, you're an oncologist, before you're banned from using the word cancer because cancer has unpleasant connotations. That's where we're heading with this. What can be done, Carol, last question, to dissuade the NHS from this kind of lunacy? It's almost like a lost cause, the NHS, in terms of the management structure. And I think, it's so easy to do this, and it's relatively cheap. Maybe, how much does this cost? Probably £500,000. I mean, it sounds cheap, but it's £500,000 could be better spent elsewhere in the system. Who actually controls it? It's got a will of its own. The whole wokeness of the NHS has a will of its own. And I'm afraid that's the problem. In the good old days, you had clinical directors, and I was one for cancer in West London, and you could sort things out, and you wouldn't tolerate this sort of nonsense. But now it's imposed from the top, and I think the top has to change. And let's see where the revolution of reform from our Health Minister Wes Streeting goes. A lot of noise has been made about it, but I've not heard actually what's going to happen. I think we have to wait and see. But it's getting on. We've been 6 months with it, and nothing much has happened.
Well, as we discussed last week, Carol, I've no hard feelings towards Wes Streeting. I think his heart's in the right place, but he's going to go
Exactly.
the way of all health secretaries, coming in like a white knight on his charger. I'm going to reform and to fix the NHS, and not doing so. But I do wish him well. I hope he succeeds. But let's face it, he just won't. Karol, really good to talk to you as always. Thank you so much. Professor Karol Sikora there, oncologist, NHS oncologist. What do you think about that? Can't use the word fat, now you can't use the word obese. So fairly soon they'll come up with, they'll come up with a plump or something, or generously proportioned, and then you won't be able to use that, and so on and so forth, until we just sort of go further and further down into this Orwellian mad rabbit hole.